Senator Hwang, good morning.
Good morning, Chairwoman Moore, and congratulations to the new chair, Representative Felipe, and the ranking leaders, Senator Sampson and Representative Scott. I am State Senator Tony Hwang, representing the towns of Fairfield, Easton, Newtown, Sandy Hook, and portions of Bethel. I want to begin by complimenting and applauding the great work of the Housing Committee in addressing access and affordability. Having been a former member for many years, I know the very hard work that this committee has and the challenges it has. And so for me, I am just here today to testify on HB 5333, an act concerning a study of affordable housing appeals. I have submitted written testimony, but I will just ad lib and offer some of the salient commentaries related to the submitted testimony. I think the first point is I want to make clear that in Connecticut, we have a housing crisis. I know there are challenges one way or the other in interpretation, but we do have an incredible challenge in the state of Connecticut as it relates to access, affordability, and equity. I think it's important to recognize we have these challenges not only in our urban centers, our suburban communities, but also our rural community. And when I talk about affordable, it really is important because for me, it's deeply personal as well. Being a first-generation immigrant with hardworking parents and made sacrifices, I spent my formative years in government-assisted housing. I understand how important it is to have the foundation and safety of a home or a residence and a safe roof over my head so that I can pursue my academics and in essence, the American dream. So for me, housing is essential. And as it relates to this bill, this is talking about a study of affordable housing appeals processes. It could have been very easily titled talking about 830G. Connecticut General Statute Section 8-30G is a unique statute that is nearly 40 years old, and it talks about affordability and impact on local zoning authorities. And the goal is noble. And being a student of housing, I understand that it was a blue ribbon panel that initiated this, and it was very well intentioned to address the questions of access, affordability, and equity. But I must say that nearly 40 years later, it has not met its goal. We can all agree, as well-intentioned and as expansive of an impact 830G has had in all of our communities, it has not met its goal because we have a housing crisis to this day. So I think the opportunity and the leadership of this committee to open up a study, and it really is a sacred cow in this building, Section 830G for many people, pro and against. But I think, and I applaud the leadership of this committee to open up a study related to this affordable housing statute. And I think for me, the focus needs to be understood. We're looking to find solutions. If things aren't as they appear to desire in our legislative intent, and it has not met its goals, I think we all have a responsibility as legislators to make changes, to supplement and study what has worked and what has not. And that's what this bill is all about. And for me, there are a couple of issues related to that. I think the first one is, it was 7 years ago as the tri-chair, myself with Senator Schlossberg and Representative Butler, we facilitated a discussion to try to make some changes. And in our success, we were one of the only bill in 2017 that overrode Governor Malloy's 8 years of vetoes. It was the only bill that overrode Governor Malloy's veto. And a collaborative effort from Senator Winfield to put in a sunset provision that if those formula changes, the small minor changes we made to 830G didn't work, it would sunset back. Well, it didn't make a dent. And here we are back to its original form. This study is important for us to reopen that exploration, to really find solutions. And another area of critical solution that I asked this committee to focus in on is knowing that we have needs, knowing how we have access questions, but we also need to understand that density building doesn't fit in every community. One of the proposals that I would love for the committee and its study initiatives to focus on is taking a look at watershed communities, communities that provide drinking water, quality and safe drinking water for our surrounding communities, be considered for some appeal processes for 830G exemption. It's important when you understand, and I represent one such community in Easton, Connecticut. Easton is over 70% watershed area, and it provides water to the surrounding areas of Bridgeport, Trumbull, all the way down to Lower Fairfield County, and as far north as Reading and Bethel. So the idea of watershed communities, to be able to protect them from density building, sewage capacity, septic capacity, is an important consideration in regards to quality of water, but also environmental impact. I give you an example that was testimony in the past by Francis Pickering, the executive director of Westcog. And he did an analysis and presentation, and I can get that to this committee, that talked about Westchester area in New York that has one of the most aggressive density building initiatives in the country. They themselves value watershed protection in northern Westchester because they understand that with increased density, you have additional runoff, you have capacity of potential contamination from pesticides and pollutants. The reality ultimately is we need to find solutions, but we need to find solutions that does not have lasting and devastating environmental impact and public safety impact. In fact, the only exception that is allowed as an exception in 830G is the issue of public safety. And it's been used in regards to parking. But I would venture to guess, if we don't protect and exempt our watershed areas, the public safety consideration of tainted water would impact all of us and not just that specific community. And I think the third area that I think is open for an appeal process is ultimately understanding 830G bases its premise and driver on private development. That has been one of the struggles when you look at Lower Fairfield County, where land value is disproportionately higher than anywhere else in the state of Connecticut. And when you put pressure on land pricing, the basis of building out increased density makes economic sense. So for me, when we look at 830G and trying to address and solve the critical need for housing, we need to look at collaborative relationships with local, state, and federal governments, not allow development, private developers, well-intentioned interests, but they have a capitalist economic interest in building up density, utilizing 830G that creates so much anger and animosity in regards to personal property rights, zoning area kind of violations, and in the plethora of local input that you'll hear later on today. So again, I'm going to summarize that 830G, well-intentioned, is looking to address a very critical issue of housing affordability, access, and equity. No doubt, I couldn't agree with a more noble mission and important mission, but nevertheless, it's shown itself to not work toward that goal. And if you repeat the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result, well, there's not a very good word for that. The second point is in regards to the appeal process and the allowance for exemption is to allow for watershed areas that provide safe drinking water and water retention and safety and purity to be exempt from increased density bills as impacted by the 830G. And the third, ultimately, to look at a different model. We have a terrific housing commissioner that has demonstrated an experience in being able to build successful, quality, affordable, and accessible housing, but doing it with the collaboration that I just articulated of state, local, and federal. And we can even point to a town that I used to represent, Westport, that with the collaboration of the Department of Transportation was able to procure state transportation land to build out 40 plus units that has been received and warmly received by the surrounding community and embraced it. And it's fully funded by state, federal, and local input. So there are models in which we can create housing solutions. And more than anything else, we have a crisis that we need to address. So I'm eager to take any questions from this esteemed body. But for me, I thank the Legislative Committee in Housing to consider the appeal process for 830G. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And thank you for that perspective and helping us educate us on how we got here and moving forward. Any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you, Senator, for being here. Thank you for your contributions to the Housing Committee over the years and the very thoughtful and in-depth testimony that you were managed to pull off in just a couple of minutes. You were answering my questions as you were speaking. I'm a little disappointed that we ended up with this as a framework for a bill. I think very pleased that the chairs were willing to bring us up a topic and a title that we could actually work with to hear testimony like yours and other concerns about 830G and the appeals process. But I am a little disappointed that some of the individual proposed bills went away and at the same time. And I'm concerned that at the end of the day that we end up with a product that includes those items. You already mentioned the wetlands issue, and I think that's a big factor. I've got lots of constituent emails and people contacting me on that subject. So certainly I'll be advocating to make sure that's in whatever final language we come up with. Are there any other topics that you that are at the forefront that you think we definitely should include if we do an 830G bill? Through you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sampson, and I have enjoyed watching the late hours of the Housing Committee, and I commend you for your passion and advocacy. In saying that, the watershed area is critical, but housing affordability and access, it's not partisan, and I mean that sincerely, because when your constituents, no matter where they are, can't find housing, and they have to move out of their community that they have been an integral part of and love, and move out of the state even so to be able to afford. It is not a partisan issue. We need to find solutions. The watershed area is going to put additional pressure on surrounding communities. And one of the ways I think we can undertake that is to look at where state and federal supplements can address those concerns. I think, and I want to repeat again, it is not a partisan issue. It may be framed that way from some of the passionate advocates that are pro and against it, but it's important. In the case of Easton, we have a board of selectmen, 3 individuals, 2 Democrats, and 1 Republican that has submitted testimony to share that they share in that vision of getting access and affordable housing, but to undermine the watershed protection that is critical to that community's character and community. And I know character is not a good word, but it is a fact in regards to how it functions. To answer your question about an additional consideration, one of the bills that we've considered in planning and development, and I know Representative Zullo has done a tremendous job in past years in housing. One of them was using CHAFA funds to be able to assist income-based first-time home buyers to acquire homes to own. And that, under the current 830G statute, would count toward the formula of affordable housing. CHAFA loans qualify under 830G statute to allow an individual to have home ownership as part of affordability, access, and equity, but at the same time, qualify under 830G. It is a bill that I think is a win-win because the statute allows CHAFA qualified candidates to get financing to buy a home instead of additional renting. And I think that's the other critical element that we're talking about that gets lost in 830G. We're talking about renting. We're talking about short-term solutions. One of the American dreams that I have always aspired to, that my parents shared and drilled into me, is homeownership is critical to setting down your roots, making the investments. We've moved away from that. Perhaps for us as a legislative body, through this CHAFA first-time buyer bill, we can initiate addressing affordability and accessibility, but at the same time, support families, support individuals, support aspiring immigrants in this country who want to produce and contribute to this country to set that, their roots and buy a home and contribute to it and be a part of an integral community and have their roots set down. So that's another example. I think the third example really is to incorporate. Now, this may be an interesting fact. Not all housing authorities are created equal, but we need to have housing authorities that are effective, but with the buy-in of the surrounding community, that bring to it the ability to create collaborative agreements between state, local, and federal. The challenge in one of the bills that we're talking about in expanding housing authority area coverage, there's a real consideration. Is there a connectedness? Is there a natural symmetry in regards to a shared common affinity and interest? So I think there's so many things we can do, but one of the parts, and Senator Sampson, I know you lament the fact that we didn't get more in, but nevertheless, I want to compliment the leadership of this committee to at least afford a conversation moving forward. And I know there are many affordable housing proponents that hate this idea of even opening the door to a conversation. But again, not doing anything doesn't solve the crisis that we have.
Thank you, Senator. So just following up on those three items, and thank you. I'm in agreement that those are three key items that definitely need to be included in the conversation. The subject of the CHAFA loan home purchase for a first-time buyer falling under 830G, I think it would qualify now, except for the fact that in order to qualify, it has to be considered affordable housing deed restricted. Is that the only thing that would prevent a current CHAFA first-time home buyer from falling into the category already?
Senator Sampson, I would defer to the attorneys and the representatives of CHAFA, but for my conversations with Representative Zulu, who's been a true champion of this, and also Representative Paletta, who has worked very closely in that area, I do not believe it needs to be de-restricted. That under the 830G language, a qualifying first-time buyer based upon income level that is able to make that purchase would qualify under the 830G. I do not believe that the property in the home needs to be de-restricted. And I would defer to the proponents of this bill, Representative Paletta and Representative Zulu, who have been true champions of this and educated me on this.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I completely agree. That's the way it ought to be. I just think that is the one impediment that currently exists that we'd have to overcome. But I'll certainly do some more research on that. Talking about housing authorities, I'm not opposed to the idea of expanding housing authorities outside their own jurisdiction, but the bill that we've got in this committee goes so far as to say that the other jurisdictions don't even have to be willing participants, and it goes even one step farther than that, which is that it says that it can be any community anywhere across the state. So I mean, you could have the New Haven Housing Authority, looking to do development in Union, Connecticut, or someplace, far, far away. Not that would necessarily happen, but it opens the door to that kind of activity. And it makes me wonder when I see that housing authorities actually have so much disposable income that they can get into that kind of development. I just curious if you would speak to that, because what you said makes sense to me, that we want to enable housing authorities to do their work the best way they can. But that, for me, is quite the rub with the proposed bill that we have. Through you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Sampson, as I mentioned, I'm very familiar with this committee's good work and its legislative debates through time. And I probably should wonder myself how I wanted to wade into the housing authority question. But it is important, because if we're truly looking to find solutions, housing authority could be part of that solution. But there should be considerations, as I raised, and let me clarify that. I have a housing authority leader in Carol Martin that represents Fairfield, a town that I represent. I used to represent Westport. The town of Westport did not have a housing authority. They hired and enlisted Carol and invited her to be part of it. And there are surrounding communities that welcome the expertise, the experience of a talented and hardworking and vision-driven, mission-driven individual by the name Carol Martin to help them meet their goals. Because one of the bills in the 830G revision that we put into place, that is still in place, is that we have requested and required that each town complete a 5-year analysis of their affordable housing stock and plan. And I know there are some communities that still have not finished that plan, and I would encourage them to do so, because the rationale when we articulated that goal was, if you don't have a plan in place, you don't understand what your needs and land challenges and density challenges in your community without a plan, then you don't have any intention to get to a goal. So for me, it was plain and simple. I know it might have been considered a mandate, but this is proactive planning and development business plan. I think it's incredible to me that there are municipalities and towns that have not met those goals. And I applaud the towns that did do so, because having that plan, they articulate the vision of addressing housing affordability and access. But to answer your question, the bill as I read it right now in regards to housing authority, there is no contiguous, there is no restrictions in regards to housing authority executives not having commercial interests, not having building interest. Again, if we're looking to utilize our housing authorities, then these housing authority executive directors must have a higher threshold in regards to ethics, in regards to their conflict of interest considerations, because if not, the ability to use the housing authority's weight and leverage, as well as possible financing, and to go across the state outside a different community using this statute is penal in my mind, and it's inconsistent with respecting the local and unique perspectives of those communities. Again, housing authorities, when done in a collaborative, in a cohesive and synergistic way, is powerful. And when you have visionary and mission-driven type of executive directors in those housing authorities, you can do really great things, as we've noticed with Carol Martin and Westport and the example that we brought up with the collaboration. But there is the potential suspicion that there may be conflict of interest abide. And when we expand without any kind of rationale in regards, as you brought up as an example, there may be one authority in an urban community that goes all the way to Union, or as Representative Dubisky has reminded us, Scotland is a town in the state of Connecticut. That doesn't seem consistent with what we're looking at to build momentum, to have the best practices, the best potential for success in addressing a common challenge that we have, which is housing crisis in need, access, and affordability. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, sir. No, thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony today, Senator, and we will certainly stay in contact and rely on your expertise going forward. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Anyone else? Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you to the committee. And I want to commend Representative Scott, who I share working Easton with, who has been also a tremendous champion and advocate in understanding the unique challenges that Easton has versus the other towns that we may represent. He's been a true champion in that advocacy, and I wanted to publicly accommodate and acknowledge his efforts. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the committee.